Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to the Forbes Education Q&A. Just to do a quick round robin in case you don't know who we are, if you've not been on the sessions before. Trust me, it is usually better than this. We've had some IT problems this morning, unfortunately, so please do bear with us. So I am Gemma Duxbury and I'm a partner in the commercial public sector team, and I'm joined by my wonderful colleagues Kat Hare and Laura McHugh from our employment team, public sector employment team, and I'm also joined by my wonderful colleague Sharose, who, well, Sharose does everything that goes wrong in my life. You sort it out for me, don't you, Sharose? So he is a litigation expert who assists us in every way because he is just a star, and he's also super dapper. He's sat there looking like he's going to court. I'm sat here with my sparkly Christmas jumper on. That's all we need to say. So good morning, everybody, and welcome. Hopefully I think we met quite a few of you or saw quite a few of you last week at ISBL, which was absolutely fantastic. We loved it and we loved seeing you all. And so I think we've got some slides and a bit of an update from my employment colleagues. Is that correct, ladies? If you haven't, then we're just stuck, aren't we, really, to be fair, because I've not really got anything else. So Ruth's normally joining us, but unfortunately she can't come this morning. So about 20 minutes ago, I think I found out that I was going to be in charge, and I don't know why they put me in charge. It's just the worst decision they ever made, really, isn't it? But anyway. So if I hand you over to my wonderful colleagues, Laura and Kat now, and I'm sure that they will be able to, oh, she started screen sharing. There we go.
Can you see that
Look at you, Laura, look at you on there.
I know.
Loving it. Right, so I shall pass you over to my colleagues. As per usual, if you do have any questions at all, well, or if anything comes up, please just post it in the chat and the Q&As. I will be keeping an eye on it. And as you can see, they're going to be updating you on the flexible working, which is going to be interesting in schools, I think. So I'll hand you over now.
Thank you, Gemma, and good morning, everybody. So yeah, as Gemma said, we were at ISBL last week, and I did do a session on flexible working. So apologies if you came to that, you'll get a little brief overview of it again today, but we've had quite a few queries and we thought it would be a good time just to go over a few principles around flexible working and also then look at some practical tips and see what some other trusts and schools are doing, because that's always interesting. So yeah, I'll take you through a few slides now. If you have any questions that come out of what we're talking about, whether it's about flexible working, whether it's about our next session that Kat's going to take you through, or any other general questions about employment, then please pop them in the box and we'll do our best to answer those for you. So why then is flexible working a thing we're talking about at the moment? You know, I think we're all aware of the impacts that COVID had, but it's still ongoing. You know, it's still something that we're grappling with now as employers. It's still something that employees are aware of in terms of their work-life balance, their priorities. They know in some cases that their jobs can be done flexibly or from home, and therefore they're taking that forwards. And I think the government have recognised the role that flexible working plays and have brought forward new legislation. So in April this year, we got the Employment Relation Flexible Working Act, as the slide says there. And this made a number of changes to the flexible working process. So essentially, when making a request, an employee would no longer have to explain what the effect was, if there's any effect, or what they thought the effect might be on the requested change on the employer and how that should be dealt with. So previously, the onus was on the employee to put forward that information. The Act also got rid of limitations about restricting employees to one request in any 12-month period. And under the Act, the employee would be entitled to make 2 requests in any 12-month period. However, it's not possible to make a further application while you've got one already ongoing with your employer. The Act said that the employer would not be permitted to refuse a request unless the employee had been consulted. And the time for an employer to make a decision would be reduced from 3 to 2 months. Although the parties can agree a longer period on that where necessary. And essentially the big one that got all the headlines at the time was that flexible working would become a day one right. I think it's always worth remembering though that right is to request flexible working. It's not necessarily a right to have it granted. Although there has been a bit of a shift in sort of what the employer has to show to say no, the employer can still say no if it's got a genuine reason, which I'll come on to shortly. So just before that then, what does flexible working actually encompass? It's a lot more than originally I think people would assume. You know, I think the straightforward requests normally are that somebody wants to reduce their hours, for example, or change the time of day that they're working at. But it can be, you know, far wider than that really. It can actually be compressed hours, it could be annualized hours. It could be someone who is full-time working wanting to go part-time, but it could also be the opposite. It could be a part-time worker who then wants to increase their hours. That would also be a request to potentially work flexibly. It can be somebody who wants home working, hybrid working, somebody who thinks they want to do their job by way of flexi time. It can be if somebody thinks that their job can be shared with another employee. It can even be somebody who says, I just want now to work on shifts, or I just want to work term time. So really, there are actually very few limits as to what the employee can request for by way of variation. If they are asking to change their working pattern in any way, then it's likely to count as a flexible working request if they do it in the right way. So what then do they have to do? You'll see there that the request has to be in writing, it has to be dated. It's supposed to state that it is a request made under the statutory procedure. And it obviously needs to specify the change that the employee wants to implement and when they want that change to take effect. It should also make it clear whether they've made a previous application and when that was. And that's obviously because of the limitations that we just mentioned in terms of how many they can make in a certain period. So they're the statutory requirements. Beyond that, it's likely to only help the employee really if they do give as much information as they can about what change they want, what's led to them that change coming in, you know, why are they making the request, have their personal circumstances changed. So it's worth them saying that. And also, whilst there might not be a strict requirement to do so, it's always good practice for an employee to say why they think a flexible working request would work in reality, or if they think it's likely to have a limited impact, they should say that, because the more information that they give, the more likely the employer can make a reasoned decision based on that and on all the information they have and whether or not they can accommodate that request. Who then can make the request? So as I said, from the 6th of April this year, there were a number of changes in terms of the formal procedure. And now we've only got 3 conditions in terms of who can make requests. So the person making the request has to be an employee. And for the purposes of the Employment Rights Act, the definition of an employee is an individual who has entered into or works under, or where the employment has ceased, did work under a contract of employment. So subject to the other criteria, the right could apply to fixed term employees. Those who are already working under a flexible working pattern, they can still make a request to change that. But what it wouldn't extend to is self-employed contractors, consultants and agency workers. The employee cannot have made 2 formal requests to work flexibly during the last 12 months, and they can't make a formal request if a request they have already made has not been concluded, and that includes any appeal. So what then does concluded mean? Well, an application or an appeal will be concluded when any of the following events occur according to the legislation. So that's 1, if a decision is made on the application or the appeal. 2, the application or the appeal is withdrawn. 3, the application or appeal is disposed of by way of agreement. Or 4, the decision period specified for the application or appeal ends without a decision, withdrawal or an agreed disposal. So that's where the time limit has just run out and none of those things have been agreed by the parties. Okay, so just then quickly to mention, what should you do if you get the request in? The onus is to deal with it as an employer in a reasonable manner. Consult with the employee. Now, we've always said that consulting with the employee about flexible working has been good practice. It's what ACAS says we should do. But the changes this year have shifted that so that you definitely need to go through and do that consultation process. You know, so the more information, like I say, that you can get from the employee, the better, but that goes both ways. The more information you can give back to the employee when you're responding to the request, especially if you are declining it, to say why you're declining it, the better. And you should also, as part of that consultation, think about any alternatives. You know, can you meet them halfway? Can you implement a trial period, for example? So consultation is really key. In terms of then how you have to notify the employee, and that includes a decision on an appeal, you have to do that within the 2-month period, unless that's extended by agreement. And if you are going to say no, you can only do that for one of the prescribed statutory reasons, which are on the screen now. So there hasn't been a change in those reasons. You know, they were there before the changes in the law this year. They still exist. I think there was some expectation that they might change or be reduced, but those are the reasons why you can still potentially say no to somebody who is putting in a request to work flexibly. Okay, so we said it's really important to deal with these requests reasonably, but what does that actually mean? As I mentioned, consultation really is the key. So I think having a meaningful discussion around whether or not you can accept the request, and if you can't accept all of them, can you secure some kind of pattern that has some benefits for the employee, you know, some of the parts of the original request that's been put in, but maybe not all of it. Trial periods, as I mentioned, really important, I think, especially if you don't think it's going to work in practice, but for example, other people have had similar requests granted, it would be useful to show that you can try it for a little while. And if then it doesn't work, at least you've got the evidence to show that you did that and you thought about it in practice, because there sometimes is a bit of a difference between what you think will happen when you get in a request on paper and what actually happens when it starts to be implemented. So trial periods can be really important in that sense. If a request is agreed, then obviously you think about how that needs to be conveyed to the employee, and a written statement of changes to their terms and conditions must be provided, and that's got to be done within 1 month of the changes taking effect. And reviewing that new pattern is always a good thing, I think, again, for both parties, to ensure that it is working as it was expected and that it is meeting those needs and it's not having any unexpected detrimental impact on either the person who requested it or their colleagues, or in the case of a school, on the pupils. I think just make sure that you give outcomes to requests as soon as you can without unreasonable delay. Explaining the business reason is important, and making sure that you do allow appeals is an important step. And also, again, if you then have an appeal, making sure that you don't wait too long before you get the decision of that appeal communicated to the employee. So then, just the final section of this, have a think about you know, your own school and what you need to implement if you're getting a lot of flexible working requests in. Even if you're not, and you want to stand out as an employer who embraces it as far as possible, then what can you do to try and do that? What help have you got available? And the government has recognised that it is difficult for schools. You know, we all know that it's much easier in some sectors than it is in education. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but the government has put forward some non-statutory guidance to help employers to develop and implement those flexible working patterns. And essentially, as the quote shows there, it's the government is saying we want to encourage schools and trusts to adopt flexible working policies, but they have to respond to the needs of the staff and the employer, and they have to address the challenges that exist at the moment. You know, so have a look at the government guidance. It is there for you to take some practical tips from if you can. And you'll see that the government has recognised that there are a number of issues to consider for schools. It's not as easy as just looking at somebody's contract, looking at the work that needs to be covered and deciding whether or not you can make a difference and move things around. You have also got to think about things like the attitude of parents. You know, unfortunately, there are still some parents who might think that having a teacher who is part-time might have a detrimental impact on their child. You know, I know we had a story, didn't we, from somebody who went to a meeting about a new school for their reception child and was told that there was a job share for that reception teacher. And I think the response was, why is my child drawn the short straw? And so actually, I think it's about engaging with parents and communicating with them and pointing out the positive impact that job share can have. You know, I know that my kids have certainly had classes where there's been two different teachers and they've really enjoyed it. You know, a teacher comes in who's really positive and refreshed, you know, especially if they've had half a week off and they come in at midway point to take over, and, you know, two different people can offer two different types of teaching, two different people to engage with. You know, some children don't engage with one member of staff, but if they've got that member of staff, in, especially in a primary school all year, actually having a different face can be really helpful for them. So I think it's about talking to parents, communicating with them, getting their views, and bearing that in mind when you are considering requests. As the slide said, you do have to think about costs. You know, it's not the only thing to think about when you're saying yes or no to a flexible working request, but it is a relevant factor for employees, because I think especially if you do say yes to a job share, it's not always as straightforward as, you know, two days for one and 3 days for another, if that's what they want to do, or 2.5 each, because you might have to build in some time where they need to hand over and they need to both be working. And obviously on paper that looks like it's more expensive to you as an employer, because you'll end up paying for more than just the full-time equivalent role. You might end up paying for 5.5 to ensure there is that seamless handover. So it is something to bear in mind, and whether you can, you know, take that additional cost. I think attainment is something, again, it ties in with parental attitudes. You know, they might be concerned that having different teachers or different members of staff who are on flexible working patterns might have an impact on a child's attainment. So whilst there's limited evidence about that impact, I think it, again, is something that you can discuss with your staff if they're putting in a request, and asking them if they think there'd be any impact on the pupil's attainment. I think employers are particularly concerned if requests come in from leadership roles such as head of department or head of key stage, and they feel that they're too demanding essentially for part-time roles. So I think in that case, employers should really be thinking about how the workload can be managed for employees who do wish to work in leadership roles part-time, as actually it can sometimes really help to retain experienced staff. You know, if it's either that you're going to lose staff or you let them work less than full time, and you think about how you can, you know, bridge that gap, then it's something that is worth considering for a school. And obviously thinking about job share arrangements or other ways of redistribution, that leadership role, trialing those flexible working arrangements, and obviously thinking about your statutory requirements, because, you know, we're aware that maintained schools have a legal obligation to have a head teacher present at all times. And provided that the headship is not left vacant for part of the week, this can actually be met by 2 part-time contracts being brought together to create a job share arrangement, and you're still fulfilling your legal obligations in that sense. Other thing to mention just there at the bottom, I don't know if people have come across this, but there are flexible working ambassador multi-academy trusts and schools, and they've actually been appointed by the DfE to support school leaders and implement and embed flexible working in their schools. So the DfE has gone out to an independent contractor to try and, you know, run this project, to say we know that we need leadership in this area. We need certain schools and academy trusts to you know, be trailblazers and say what works and what doesn't work, and to find out what the benefits are. So that's worth having a look at. I think we're waiting for more information to come on the back of that project. It's ongoing at the moment. I know 5 new trusts have joined it this year, but just keep your eyes peeled for that, I think. And if you know of any trusts who are part of that, reach out and see what their experience has been. Just some considerations then. I think we've covered some of these, but as I say, you know, think about if you've got teaching staff, yes, they obviously have to be in class for a certain amount of time, but can they do PPA, for example, from home? I know a lot of schools are already doing that. Can some of the admin team have permanent working from home days? I think there's a nervousness around saying yes to support staff, but not teaching staff. And I understand that, but actually it is about the particular role and whether or not that role can be done flexibly. And I think, you know, teaching staff do understand that to a degree, and they understand that their role is different to central team staff or support staff. So I think don't be too nervous, and I think don't go in with the approach that you have to say no to support staff or central staff or leadership who aren't based in a classroom just because you've said no to some teaching staff. I think as long as you can justify it, and you work with those staff and you have the right consultation and you talk to them about why it might be different for one group of people and not for another, then I think, you know, potentially you can be a bit more flexible with different teams. Think about things, just, you know, giving staff half days when you can for things like Christmas plays for children or sports days, or just a general half day. You know, if you could do that. I know my husband is a primary school teacher, and they have always had just a half day for Christmas shopping in December, and that's all staff. Now, interestingly, that has changed a bit in the last couple of years, and as the school has grown, they've been finding it difficult to accommodate that just in December. So it's now a take your half day whenever you want, obviously subject to agreement, but it's now throughout the year. So it's sort of taken away from it being a Christmas thing, but for some people, they'd much rather use it later in the year if they've got something else they want to attend. And obviously think about if the term time only, it might be different, but for all year round staff, can holidays be taken during term time for special exceptions? Because whilst it's not a strict flexible working request, it's still something that I think would benefit staff, and it's seen as you being flexible and it gives a positive outcome. So just in terms of what other trusts are doing, just for me to finish off, you may have heard about Dixon's Academy Trust, who have been quite vocal in their 9-day fortnight. Their chief exec said that they wanted to introduce radical flexible working to help tackle teacher workload, but also to boost recruitment and retention. And I think everybody on the session today will know that those are potential issues for schools. So this 9-day fortnight is apparently not simply compressing 10 days of teaching into 9. It's supposed to be being done by using what they say are creative and dynamic scheduling and different approaches to pupil grouping alongside increased PPA time. So when I did a bit of research into that, I know that trust is trying to share resources as much as possible. So they have a really strong, I think, focus on central resources that can then be used by a number of different departments, where you might not initially think there is overlap, but they're finding that there is, and that then reduces the amount of work that the teachers in different departments have to do and allows them to potentially work this 9-day fortnight. They're also allowing PPA to be done remotely, and they're saying that their commitment to do this flexible working is not going to impact pupils' contact time. So that's obviously a real issue for schools, is dealing with, you know, the required amount of time that a pupil needs to be in school and be taught by their teachers against this need to be flexible. A similar kind of offer is another academy in Buckinghamshire, where the head teacher offers her staff one afternoon of flexible working every 6 weeks. Now that has to be done by moving PPA around, I think, and putting it as a period 5 lesson, which means it can be done off site. As I say, a lot of schools already might be treating PPA as a time when individuals can go off site and can go home, but it's about not being rigid if you can, and allowing PPA to be taken where and when works for the employee. Another trust has introduced a form of flexible working known as duvet days. That's Liberty Academy Trust. They've got 3 schools, and they've said that staff can have a term time day off with no expectation of working it back, as long as half a term's notice is given when the day is taken. Now that's quite interesting, because I think in other sectors, duvet days or wellbeing days, as they're sometimes known, are used, but they're more of a, you know, immediate reaction to how somebody is feeling that particular day almost, or even that week. So again, in other sectors, they'll be subject to business need and subject to agreement with managers, but it's more about, you know, if, well, actually today I just feel like I really want to stay at home. If I can, my mental well-being isn't good, can I take a duvet day? Whereas this idea is quite different. If actually you have to give half a term's notice, you know, it's not then really about how you feel on that day, but it is another way of saying, look, we're going to give you some extra time off if we can. So in terms of your own culture, I think just think about the points that are on the slide there. Encourage the requests, you know, even if you don't think you're going to be able to accommodate them. I think you need to be seen that it's fine and it's welcome for an employee to put forward their views on why they think it works or doesn't work. You know, raise awareness. They should all know where they should go to in terms of looking at a policy, how they make a request, who they should speak to. And like I say, just try and embed it into your culture as much as possible. But hopefully some of those tips will help you going forwards to navigate what is a very tricky area for education.
Thanks so much, Laura. I think that's like, it's really hard, isn't it? It's a really difficult area because I think initially people's reactions are quite negative towards flexible working in the education sector, because they sort of, a lot of attitudes is, oh, well, they get enough sort of holiday as it is kind of thing. And I do think there is always that negativity. And also as a parent, like you say, there's a natural nervousness as well about job share and all stability for my child and all those sorts of things. So I think it is really, really tricky, but it clearly is a thing. And, there's the non-statutory guidance and everything. So it's something that does have to be considered. So we have had a question, which sort of relates to this, which says that they've had a request where person A has requested a reduction in their hours. So, for example, by 10 hours a week, to be covered by an appointment of an assistant, which is like person B, which is 30 hours a week at lower pay. It seems hard to argue against this other than if person A leaves. To reduce that risk, can this be considered a job share, even though they are different jobs?
So if they're carrying out different roles, I think it wouldn't be a strict job share in the sense that a job share generally is about you identify a role and then you can split that between different individuals. So I think it depends on the overlap of what they're doing, and there'll be different pay elements to consider there, wouldn't there? But I think the request can potentially be, considered, and I think there are potential ways to say if in reality you don't think it can work because of that additional cost, if you need to cover those hours. I think as long as you can demonstrate that, then there's a potential to say we've got one of the grounds to rely upon. But I think you just need to have that justification. In that sense, my instinct is it doesn't feel like a job share.
No.
Do you agree? I think it would be a case of you're changing two different people's contracts of employment there. So you've got to think about the impact on the person who, the assistant, and whether they want to increase their roles. So I think there's quite a lot to work through. But technically for me, a job share is about the role rather than two different roles being merged together to form one.
But this is an example of how flexible working's changing, isn't it? And people are thinking about dynamic ways of working, and you want to be seen to be at least thinking about how it could work. But obviously there's the statutory ground of additional costs to the business or unable to meet demands of the organisation. So it's certainly something that you would need to kind of look at, I think, if you certainly put a request in.
They have added that there's no additional costs and they would recruit person B, so it's clearly somebody that's not already there. So, but
yes, they can absolutely do that. I just think they need to treat that as two different jobs really, and two different contracts of employment.
And then they put 37 hours moves 57 hours. I'm not quite sure I understand that, but hopefully you've answered the question. I think it's like what you said as well. It's the roles, isn't it? It's the actual roles was part of it, because my understanding of a job share, I don't know about anybody else's, and I'm not an employment lawyer, this is just me saying this, is that they do the same job. And it's the job, the role that's shared, and they sort of have the equivalent qualifications and knowledge and experience and all that sort of thing. Oh, sorry, they've now put 37 hours, now 27 plus 30 equals 57, so work as a team. But again, I still think it comes back to that role, doesn't it?
Yeah, they can potentially do that if they want to, but I think what there's two distinct, well, there's two people obviously, but there's also two different distinct jobs there. If actually what one person could do in 10 hours, you're saying the other person would need 30 hours, they're quite different levels of experience and skills, aren't they? So I think that's the issue, is that yes, you can absolutely do it, but you treat it as one person is simply reducing their contract, they're becoming part-time, then you're recruiting a new role on a set of terms which accounts for the 30 hours. So it's two distinct roles.
Yeah, that's how I would it, because sort of if I did a job share as such, I couldn't do it with, for example, because obviously I'm a partner and a qualified solicitor with a paralegal, for example, because they can't do what I do. I mean, I know that's a bit of a daft example, but that would be my understanding of it.
Yeah.
Thank you, ladies. Does anybody have any other questions while we're here for any of the panelists? Sharose and Sam, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add or talk about, anything exciting in the property world or the litigation world going down that we need to know about?
Not really from a property perspective that I can think of. But if anything changes, I'll try and update people at the next Q&A.
Thanks, Sam.
I think it's just the almost always insurance type advice that I try and give clients, that if you preempt issues that are arising, whether that's with your service providers or otherwise, by all means, just reach out to us at early doors. More often than not, we have clients, and we're more than happy to assist at the very last hour, who turn up when things have gone wrong, so to speak, or they've tried to navigate through the process and unfortunately just made things worse for themselves. So there's nothing new to update as such, but more than happy to have a discussion with someone or anyone if they're unsure on where they sit with a potential dispute. Thanks,
Sharose. Sharose is great. He helped my mum, so Sharose is great. I can vouch for Sharose. Oh, lovely. I've just seen Ricky Gervais pop up on my screen because obviously
yeah,
this is
a section for you as well.
That's the male version of me at the Christmas party. That's my move, is stolen there. So obviously I think that Laura and Kat have something to say about sexual harassment at Christmas parties, which at this time of year is a massive issue. And so I will hand back over to them for part 2.
Thank you, Gemma. I may need your help shortly, so all will be revealed.
Oh, blimey, hang on.
But we did talk about sexual harassment in the workplace a few Q&As ago, because there has been a change in the law which came into force in October, where organisations are now under a duty to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, and it's really proactive duty. And I know in the session that we did, which will have been recorded, we did talk about some practical tips for you to think about. But we are approaching, and we are in Christmas party season, and it's always quite an interesting time for employment lawyers, for HR, because there's lots of different scenarios that can occur. But with this new proactive duty that's on employers to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace, Christmas party is something that you really need to think about, to make sure that you have thought about all the potential consequences that could arise from a Christmas party, and just make sure you've kind of thought about it, you've risk assessed it. And if anything does happen, you can say, well, look, we did everything we possibly could. We took all reasonable steps to prevent this sexual harassment from occurring. So I put together a scenario of things that may go wrong. And in this scenario, it does cover things that I've actually advised on previously. So it does seem quite far-fetched, but believe me, there are some quite unusual situations that do arise from Christmas parties. So you've organised the best Christmas party at the trendiest venue in town, called Day One Rights. It's an old converted mill with all the original features, including uneven floors, nooks and crannies, and even the old vault, which stored all the old produce, complete with a lockable door. People will really be able to switch off from work and their personal life, as there's no phone signal or Wi-Fi there. You really want to reward all your staff for their hard work, so you've arranged for there to be an unlimited free bar, and you've asked the bar manager to order in extra spirits so everyone can have free shots. And you've asked the venue to have some canapes on standby in case people need some food to soak up the alcohol later in the night. The office manager, Angela Rayner, has done a final venue check and has reported back that the space looks fab. It looks really Christmassy, apparently, with tinsel and mistletoe everywhere. Angela even joked that she hopes her boss, Kia, takes advantage of the mistletoe. The venue is about an hour away from the office, so some people will be driving there or walking from the bus or train stop that's only about 20 minutes from the old mill. As the venue is a little remote, you've decided to pay for hotel rooms for everyone at a local hotel so they can stay out as long as they want to. You don't have an unlimited budget though, so you have booked twin rooms. You're sure that people won't mind sharing with a colleague. You've asked Boris Johnson and Donald Trump from the sales team for their views, and they've said that nobody would have an issue with room sharing. They said it would add to the fun and it would help people bond. So, are there any HR hotspots there?
Quite a few, I'm saying, Kat, quite a few.
Quite a few. So if people always want to put in the chat just any kind of thoughts that spring to mind and things that may not be wise if we're thinking about taking the reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. And I've taken a screen grab from Love Actually. This is it's really upsetting, this part, isn't it?
That kills me, that film.
Alan Rickman, I know, and poor Emma Thompson, she's so devastated. Yeah, no,
I love that.
I know. So yeah, so I mean, if people have any views about where there might be some issues, perhaps.
Alcohol fueled event.
Yes. Yeah. So that's not great. So, you know, Christmas parties are an extension of the workplace. So, you know, it's a works function, you're paying for it, or you're not, or at least you're organising it, paying for some of it perhaps. But it is an extension of the workplace. So if you are going to be having an unlimited bar, is that taking reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment? You know, if you're only putting a few canapes on that are going to come out at midnight, that's not great either. So if you're thinking about risk assessing a Christmas party, then you need to be thinking about, do we need to limit the amount of free drinks? Should we perhaps be saying no shots? That's probably wise. And are we thinking about, you know, should there be some food as well? Or if you're not providing food, saying to people, look, make sure you have something to eat before you come, because it is just going to be a few drinks. You know, we'll pay for a couple of glasses of wine. I don't know if there's any more, Gemma.
We've had another comment. We've had another one say the chat is disabled. This is a HR nightmare. Just cancel the whole thing. Lol.
Yeah. Well, I know, and these are all scenarios that I have dealt with previously. So that, you know, it is potentially a HR nightmare, and there are some organisations that now just say, look, we'll just put a bit of extra money in the December pay packet and, you know, go and spend it as you wish, especially because you've got to think about from a cultural point of view as well. Not everyone may drink, not everyone may celebrate Christmas. So it may be that, you know, perhaps a bit of extra cash that people can do as they wish, maybe easier. But, you know, thinking about, you know, the venue as well. I mean, it's a health and safety nightmare, isn't it? Uneven floors. How would you deal with mobility? Nooks and crannies, dark corners. You know, if somebody was being sexually harassed, would you be able to see it? Especially if you've got a lockable vault. You know, you need to think carefully about that. So if you're looking at that venue, we'd probably say you probably would steer clear of it, or at least risk assess it to try and put some candles or something so you could actually, or perhaps not candles, that might be a fire hazard, but somewhat extra lighting in place. Mistletoe, is that creating the right impression for the Christmas party? You perhaps want to steer clear of that. And of course, go on. Sorry, go on.
We've had another comment, which is twin rooms, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. And then there's another comment, but the accommodation is positively encouraging intimate situations and creating risks. Now, this relates to a story for me, doesn't it, Kat? Because when I first joined Forbes, many people might know this, I first joined Forbes, and we were at Isbel actually, and we didn't have enough bedrooms. So I said, oh, someone can share with me. That's absolutely fine. Until I went into the bedroom and it was open plan with the bathroom open plan as well. I was like, hang on a minute. No, that cannot be happening. So I was like, no, you know, that whole we'll share a room thing. No, not appropriate. So a slightly different twist, but it can happen.
It can. No, it can. And, you know, it's a really nice thought of accommodation, etc. But, you know, yeah, sharing rooms is a bit of a no-no. And you know, even sharing lifts. I mean, there's been a case recently where one of the issues where it was found to be sexual harassment was where the person giving somebody a lift home kept putting the hand on the person's knee when they were changing gear. You know, that's not comfortable, is it? So, you know, think about lift sharing as well. People are not going to always be comfortable with that. And of course, you know, think about there's no Wi-Fi, there's no 3G, 4G, 5G. You know, people need to be able to be contactable as well. And you know, I think there's certainly a lot of scenarios there that we that we need to think about from a sexual harassment point of view. But because there is this new legal obligation, it's really important that you think about it and make sure that you're protecting your organisation. And of course, you know, it's in the headlines all the time, sexual harassment. You know, we've had Harrods recently. You know, last week it was Greg Wallace. You know, it's something that's really at the forefront of people's minds. It's something that you really need to be aware of as an organisation, but especially with Christmas parties as well. So like I said, we did do an update recently on this new act, this new piece of legislation is now in force. So it's this proactive duty on employers to prevent sexual harassment in the workplace. You've got to show that you've taken these reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment happening. And, you know, the consequences can be quite far-reaching, because if it does go to a tribunal, an employment judge finds that, yes, there has been sexual harassment and an employer didn't prevent that, then the compensation can be increased by up to 25%, which is really significant if you're already losing at a tribunal, to then have that extra additional compensation added on top. And I think you've also got to think about, as well, as we said in the previous session, that as well as employment tribunal claims, there's also the Equality and Human Rights Commission who have enforcement powers as well. So they can look at organisations and say, actually, we're not happy that you've put in place these reasonable steps to prevent sexual harassment. We're going to come and take enforcement action. We think you should be doing X, Y, and Z. So it's really important that you are thinking about, have you got your policies and procedures up to date? Do people know what isn't acceptable in the workplace? And of course, Christmas parties will be an extension of your workplace. So make sure people know of the conduct that is and is not acceptable. Make sure people know how to report it. Think about anonymous reporting if you can, even if it's just a case of in the staff room having an area where people could just report something that happened. Maybe if you can do anonymous reporting, or if you do have people in place who can champion sexual harassment in the workplace, that's always really useful. But it's really hard in organisations to have that culture. But I think it's just important to revisit your policies and procedures, make sure they're up to date. And whilst third-party harassment isn't specifically mentioned in the new Act, the new duty to prevent sexual harassment would cover third parties. The Equality and Human Rights Commission have said, you know, why would we not cover third party harassment? It should be covered. And also the way that harassment is defined within the legislation is wide enough to cover third party harassment. So it's just thinking about if you're having people coming on site in your organisation, do they know what's acceptable standards? So if you've got parents coming on site, governors, contractors, etc. It's just thinking about, are we ensuring that our staff are protected from sexual harassment from all elements, really, in all angles. So just moving back to Christmas party, I think it's really important that, you know, you send out that memo to staff. You know, we want you to have fun. We want to reward you for all the help, all the hard work that you've done over the year. But, you know, this is an extension of the workplace, so behave appropriately. Think about your emergency contacts, just a practical point of view. Have you got those up to date? You should have them up to date, but just make sure you have them for everyone in case somebody, and this is a scenario where somebody, you know, had far too much to drink and we were trying to find out how to get them home and had to, you know, look on the HR system to find the emergency contact because they didn't know where they were because of all the wine they'd drunk. So, you know, think about emergency contacts. Limit the free bar, like we said. Think about perhaps not having shots. Think about perhaps having some food as well. Make sure people can get to and from the venue safely. Be clear about when the party finishes. You know, if people want to go on to an after party, they want to carry on out, that's absolutely fine. But if you're clear about when the party stops, then it's on their head, be it if they want to go out and carry on. We do have lots of WhatsApp chat groups now with work because they're really convenient. They're a good way for people to chat. It's really good for culture. But what you don't want is for people to be sharing photos from the Christmas party, which may, you know, not be appropriate for a work WhatsApp chat. So think about perhaps muting that during the party, or somebody kind of keeping an eye on it. And also think about who's in charge, who's going to be the responsible adult during the Christmas party. You don't want everyone kind of drinking or not being in control. You need somebody who's going to, if there is an issue, they can keep an eye on it. And as well, from a risk assessment point of view, you can say, well, actually, this person's going to be in control. They're going to be keeping an eye out. If there's any kind of inappropriate behaviour, any kind of suggestions of sexual harassment, then that person can jump on it and deal with it from a HR and employment law point of view. And we can help you with your sexual harassment policies, procedures. We can help you with putting together what your risk assessment may look like, and we also offer training as well. Bearing in mind the new legislation that's coming into place. So there's Ruth and I. I'm looking very thoughtful, aren't I, on that flyer?
Thanks, Kat. That's brilliant. That's really interesting, actually, because having that scenario was really helpful because it sort of made me think about things I would never think about. You know, like, for example, right down to like the venue and whether or not that's suitable even. I mean, that would never even entered my head to think about that, which, I mean, and is ridiculous, isn't it, really, when you think about it? And the food as well, you know. I know it sounds silly, but it's just something that probably wouldn't have registered with me. Whereas like all the other things are quite glaringly obvious, I think. But there are, you know, when you dig down into it, it's actually a lot more detailed than you think.
And putting all that on a risk assessment just shows you've thought about it.
Yeah.
And that you've done what you've done, why you've done what you've done. So if there is any issues, you've got the evidence, the paper trail there to say, well, look, we did think about it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, gosh, well, bit scared now. I'm glad that only my involvement though was the chat. I'm panicking when you thought I was getting involved. I thought you were example for something then. Oh, blimey. Right, fabulous. Well, I think we're coming to the end of our time now. So all that's left for me to do is to say thank you to everybody for coming and joining us. Thank you as well for your support this year, coming and attending these events. I know that we all love doing them. It's one of my favourite events. Not necessarily hosting it, but definitely joining it. But it's been a real pleasure. You know, I know that we all can say that we all love working with our clients and we thoroughly enjoy working with you all. And, you know, we'll be back in the new year with gusto for whatever's coming to us. I mean, one of the main things that I'm looking at the moment is the Procurement Act, which is still deathly silent from government on that. So who knows when that'll be. But yeah, we will all be back in the new year. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank my fabulous panelists who are all just absolutely brilliant people. I'm not just saying that because I'm biased, I don't have to. If anyone knows me, they know I'm honest. But they're all fantastic and thank you as well for all your support, as I say. So just have a fabulous Christmas and a happy new year. Hopefully you will be getting some more information. I don't know if it's popping up from our marketing team or whatever as to when the next sessions are going to be, but I'm sure that we'll be in contact and that it will be advertised to you. Please do come and join us. And all that's left for me to say is thank you very, very much and Merry Christmas. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody.